Well, welcome and good evening, wonderful dice of all alignments. I am Lunar D8, and I have a book on the Constitution right here. Now, I don't know how many parts it would take to read through this, but I figured, you know, for each part I could just have a picture of the President of the United States. Start with the first president and work my way forward. Now, if for whatever reason, if this book were to last long enough to run out of presidents, then maybe I might have pictures of like memorials or something. I don't know. But yeah, this book, it's either $15 or $20. I can't remember offhand. Either way, good deal. The front says the Constitution, the story of the creation and adaptation of the most important document in the history of the United States of America. Written by, it's, do I just still pronounce this as a Jerry? It's Gerry and Janet Sauter. Okay, so they must have both have the same last name, maybe? I'm not sure. So I assume, given the way it's written. The back of it says, the history of America's most important document. The original signed document of the Constitution bound the people to 13 disparate colonies and grand democratic experiment, and that was just the beginning. As the fledgling nation shaped its identity and advanced its position on the world stage, demands were made of this four-page document that could never have been envisaged by the 18th century authors. This fascinating book examines the Constitution's origins and development through the argument and compromise and provides an in-depth look at the process of introducing new amendments, all of which have enabled it to remain relevant and authoritative in the modern age. This book contains 128 pages in total. Back looks like this picture of Ben Franklin and is it Madison? John Adams, probably. And the front's got a picture. Really should know the name of the building, but I do not. And of course, the U.S. flag up top. But the building depicted here I don't actually recognize right off the bat. That is a shame. Okay. Shall I read the table of contents? Probably. Okay, table of contents. Chapter 1, the novel idea of government by the people. The Declaration of Independence, the beginning of a new order. Articles of Confederation, a growing nationalism. Chapter 2, a document whose time had come. The Great Compromise. Chapter 3, one size fits all, establishing a financial system. Chapter 4, it's perfect, let's change it. The Bill of Rights, distribution of power. Chapter 5, the growing the country. The Missouri Compromise, acquisition by conquest, the Homestead Act, the Polar Bear Garden, the NASA Act. Chapter 6, our Constitution divided, the 13th Amendment. Chapter 7, challenges to the Constitution, the South skirts around the Constitution, the road to black suffrage, the Ku Klux Klan Act and the Jim Crow laws, testing the Electoral College and its power, Theodore Roosevelt takes over, Presidents, Congress, Supreme Court, and Civil Rights. Chapter 8, Legislating Human Bondage, the Fugitive Slave Act, the Chinese Exclusion Act and Japanese Internment. Chapter 9, Legislating Morality, Prohibition, Desegregation of the Military. Chapter 10, Corrections and Clarifications, FDR attacks the Depression, the Lend-Lease Act in World War II, voting at 18 and the right to bear arms. Chapter 11, and yet she still stands. Then we have an appendix, which actually contains, the Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights. And then there's an index and credits. Okay. Introduction. And over here we have a picture of the United States Capitol, Washington, D.C., seat of the nation's legislature. Congress first met in this building in November 1800. So it is kind of fascinating how a lot of the older buildings we built, we managed to maintain them so they're not, falling apart. Because I've also seen a lot of older buildings that are falling apart. But then again, I know there's a lot of other countries, especially in Europe, that have buildings that have been standing for hundreds of years, if not longer. So that is impressive and amazing. I have been to Washington, D.C. once. I think it was either late 2000 or very early 2001. I can't remember. But I was a lot younger back then. Introduction. The United States Constitution is America's instruction book. A faded, barely legible set of parchment pages, the original signed document was handwritten in iron gull ink with a feathered quill pen. Cast in 18th century language and preserved in archival security, it is now available for public view and contemplation. The Constitution's present day fragile appearance, however, masks the muscle and power of its carefully chosen words, forged at a time when life, death, and government rested in the ruling doctrine of divine right of kings. Released from these frail pages, these revolutionary words have thundered through America's halls of justice and within its legislative bodies with a seemingly unstoppable corporeal authority. Historians might all agree that the U.S. Constitution has been responsible for creating the most successful democratic republic ever envisioned. American citizens have lived by its commandments, stretched its implications, ignored its wisdom, tested its premises, assaulted its foundation, and interpreted the intentions of its framers to fit our changing decades of social, moral, and economic existence. Each new generation discovers immutable strength, latent challenges behind those opening words, we the people. Government by the people can subject to human imperfection. This book concentrates on the challenges to our Constitution through generations of interpretation. The foundation of this government was laid well before the first words were inked on parchment. British colonials who populated the eastern seaboard of North America had fought for their king and mother country against the French in the 7 Years' War, concluding their service with victory in 1763. On returning to their villages, farms, homesteads, and plantations, they settled in once again, governed by British rule of law. The British, however, faced debts run up by the Long War and needed additional revenue. New taxes were levied on the colonies without extending representation to them in the House of Parliament. The Crown felt entitled to these taxes as payment for government, security, banking, and trade. The colonial congresses petitioned for relief, but when one tax was withdrawn, another appeared. Garrison troops were harassed, commerce was disrupted. In 1776, fueled by the lure of independence, the colonies met in common Congress and drafted a declaration that was set in motion a revolution and announced the reasons for such treasonous acts to the world. We begin this journey when memories of treason's noose were still fresh and the country was young and still encumbered with old world customs. The act of separation produced a government of and for the people to achieve and preserve new freedoms. Even as the struggle to secure those freshly claimed liberties raged across fields and towns, the Continental Congress was, quite literally, kept on the move in order to stay ahead of the British Army while working to hammer out a government for its new citizens. This assumed, of course, that we were going to win. Ratified in 1781, before deciding battle at Yorktown and our shaky birth as a new nation. The Articles of Confederation that emerged from this effort demonstrated our national spirit. The first steps toward a unified self-government. These articles necessitated constant rethinking as to just what it was the representatives were trying to build. Finally, after 6 years of trial and error, experimenting, and often painful discovery, the independent states of America decided to work toward the stability of a strong central government. The founders spent the summer of 1787 creating a new constitution, a revised edition of the original, not as an ivory tower theory, but in spare prose, demanding ratification by all 13 of the United States in the coming years. As our population expanded and then exploded across the continent, each generation tested this bold experiment in statehood in ways perhaps never envisioned by its framers. The demands of politics, commerce, industry, society, and geography have challenged the translations of this 18th century wisdom enacted through 200 years of revisions, articles, sections, acts, bills, and amendments. We look at many of those demands over the decades of change from colonial times to the 21st century and see that through a series of 11 thematic chapters, how challenges were met by a variety of generations. The aim is to understand what's required of today's world can resonate with similar needs made apparent and solutions put forth in response 100 years ago. Only 27 changes have been admitted to the original document from roughly 2,000. From roughly 2,000 proposed amendments to the Constitution. I don't even know what all those amendments would be. But could you imagine if we had, regardless of the subject matter of said amendments, but could you imagine if we had actually had 2,000 plus amendments to the Constitution, regardless of what they were? And even more so, if you were specifically to think of what they were, which I have no clue. I'm actually surprised there were that many attempted changes. I'm sure there's somewhere on the internet there's probably a list of every proposed. Heck, maybe it's in this book. We'll see how the mechanics of change insightfully built into the Constitution have been employed as we have experienced collisions of events and philosophies over the decades and centuries. The speed of communication, revelations in the spheres of social and physical science, and our participation in growing global community have demanded answers to never imagined questions. Volumes have been written examining the tangle of the constitutional interpretation to address these various and evolving changes. What is the future of our founding principles and rules of law? The authors argue here that an examination of its past clearly suggests how today's Constitution maintains considerable influence and legitimacy with which to inform generations to come. The main concept of the Constitution is this. We understand that no matter what group or political party or whoever's ever in charge, you can't really trust people in authority to have everyone's best interest in mind. The main point of the Constitution was to have a system of government that even if you had people that you couldn't necessarily trust, that it still allowed a government that functioned, but also prevented them from abusing the authority. So, like I said, it was meant to allow certain protections, especially the Bill of Rights. Simply because, not just in colonial America, but in countries all throughout history, there's lots of times that, kings, emperors did really, really bad abuses of power, which they probably didn't even see as an abuse of power. It was just the way it was. And like this book said, I mean, times have changed over hundreds of years. I mean, heck, just think. It was like, what, 1969 we first landed on the moon? And I remember the internet back when I was a kid. Like, I remember at one point such a thing as the internet didn't exist at all. And then I remember the internet being just the sounds of robots screaming. You know, it was like a fax machine. You barely got any connection at all, and you couldn't have phones. Like, if someone were to pick up the phone, also the internet would drop. You know, back in the era of AOL, Earthlink 95. So, but the simple concept is just that a lot of bad things that happened in the past, it's supposed to prevent those things, or at least help to. But it's just, yeah. I am really falling asleep here. I should have been asleep a long time ago. I'm exhausted. The novel idea of government by the people, demand for representation, government, and the Declaration of Independence. The Constitution of the United States of America was shaped and fashioned on the forge of great ideas. It was the project of a succession of intellectual leaps that became known as the Age of Enlightenment in the 18th century. The German philosopher Immanuel Kant defined this period in human evolution as man's release from his self-incurred tutelage, tutelage being man's inability to make use of his understanding without direction from another. The English-born American, M. McGray, I think? Is that how you pronounce that? And firebrand journalist Thomas Paine called it the Age of Reason, at a time when the ability to rule men's lives lay in the divine right of kings, where monarchical decree controlled life, death, and liberty, the freedom of speech, and birthright condemned the rise of a person regardless of his or her ability. Some men of letters turned their thoughts to the question, why? Government managed by the ancient Greeks, democracy, or the Romans, republic, with the power of the citizens' vote, or political representation of the citizens' need, had long been suppressed, but the printed and published words of those referred to in the times as the substitute aristocracy, learned men such as Jean Jacques Rousseau, I prefer liberty with danger than peace with slavery, or John Locke, being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions, gained acceptance during a period when people believed they were oppressed. Above is a picture of English philosopher John Locke, father of English empiricism, whose written works on the rights of man helped colonial consider independence from Great Britain. Listen. Okay, I believe this would be pronounced salons, but the salons of Europe spread the Age of Enlightenment. Informal conversations among learned persons held in private homes and public rooms were the main activity of the salons. These intellectual exchanges often resulted in the spreading of enlightenment into the public arena through personal copied, circulated, and published letters, as well as letters to the editors of widely distributed gazettes and magazines. These new ideas of social and political change reached a wide audience through this emerging periodical press. In Boston, Philadelphia, and other major cities in the colonies, the book The Age of Reason and the pamphlet Common Sense by Thomas Paine were being read and debated in public houses, church meetings, and in local newspapers. Right, we have a recitation of Voltaire's Tragedy, La Orphelin de la Chine at Madame Geoffroy's salon in Paris. Isolated from the old world's tyranny, felt cut off from representation by their mother country, Great Britain. The colonists had come to this wild and vast new world on the east coast of North America and had worked hard to support themselves and become valuable trading partners as loyal subjects of their king. British acts against Americans' liberties and levies against commerce were becoming intolerable, as treasonous threats and autocratic demands sailed back and forth between American and English ports. New ideas and enlightened thoughts were being born in the salons and cafes of Europe. These entitlements spoke of the people's inalienable rights and representational government shaped by their own hands. Provocations and demands of the colonies, such as the Stamp Act and the Townshend Act, and the boarding British troops in private Boston homes, demanded an immediate declaration of independence in 1775. A more moderate group, led by John Dickinson of Pennsylvania, appealed for a final letter to be extended directly to the Crown, seeking a peaceful solution. This so-called olive branch petition placed all the guilt on Parliament, which the colonies presumed had acted without the king's knowledge. George III refused to accept it. He called down the wrath of the empire on every colonist who dared sign such a document. On November 9, 1775, 3 months after the olive branch petition had been rejected and every signatory branded a traitor with the reward on their heads, the Continental Congress created an agreement of secrecy to protect these fugitives from the death penalty. It was eventually signed by 87 delegates. Above left is King George III of Great Britain, 1738-1820, in coronation robes and a 1754 portrait. He refused to consider independence for the colonies. Above right, the Revolutionary War Agreement of Secrecy signed by the delegates of the Congress, knowing that they were committing treason against the Crown. Okay, we'll call that a part. Like I said, I should probably go to sleep or pass out. One of those things. Bye.